Boa tarde,
Okay, good afternoon. Hello,
todos
everyone.
muito bem-vindos.
Welcome to the
Tech.
FEBRABAN Tech panel, the FEBRABAN Tech 2025. And now the focus will be on carbon markets. Once this is regulated, the challenge is now
Em ação
to transform this law into concrete actions and make sure that
sinalização
this can there can be in green integrity, in efficacy, and gains for society.
dessa
We
perspectiva.
will start with this perspective. We will look at different roles played by different financial institutions, legal institutions, corporate institutions will also play in this process. Preliminary studies also show that this regulation will impact between 4 to 5,000 companies in the country, which means 15% of the companies that we have in the country. The regulation for these institutions and how
Regulados e voluntários de carbono. Quais são as oportunidades de
and what
investimento?
are the opportunities of investment that we have in this context? For this debate, now I would like to invite Daniela Bax. She is the chief of the development support to be.
Senior Expert do Santander Brasil.
Vivienne Kwon, senior expert from Santander, Brazil, Tiago Ricci, legal director at Systemica, and Aline Ferreira, compliance leader at Citi Brazil.
Muito obrigada a todos.
Thank you very much for your time, for being with us. And we are going to start with a general question so that we can start our panel.
Legal.
With the approval of the legal framework for carbon credit regulated market, how are financial institutions and how can they get ready to operate efficiently for the regulated market and the volunteer credit markets? So what are the opportunities that are ahead of us? Would you like to start, Daniela? Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone.
Começo sim, e queria sair assim, né, sair um pouco, né, a gente vai falar bastante da lei, do sistema brasileiro.
We are going to talk about the Brazilian law about emissions and the challenges that come along with that law regarding regulation, how governance will be, and the credibility of those certifications, and to generate that in the market. But I think prepare for this market will depend on something that it's really important, that is going to be the core for the market, which is the informational system. In order to get ready to get all the stakeholders, it's important to have information. Okay, the law will bring the need to have proper data of whatever is necessary for the goals and to reach with industries and the regulated sectors, and also those that are not regulated but want to participate. So getting ready goes along this, and this data will allow that, and once configured and with register, I think it will an important context, both for real economy to understand what's going on or whatever they need to do regarding technology and value chain, and to understand the whole context, and also financial institutions to look at that portfolio, to check that information, to understand where we can guide those financial instruments and whatever will come along with this information. So to have a very positive perspective to understand the context of the proper needs in the market, I mean, for financial instruments and real economy, challenges that we'll have in technology, maybe the size of a company involves a whole supply chain with other companies. So having all this broad view will be important to understand and to bring all the important players in the market. And prioritizing these instruments will also be important, and to see how they fit together and how the policies will help with all the determinations in the country. So it will play an important role to align that with the role, with the climate plan, and with all sectors that we have regarding government and the Minister of the Environment, with 7 key sectors
se integrem
so that they can have an integration and we can achieve these goals in the mitigation of risks. So Brazil has this challenge to bring this information together and to think about public policies regarding the climate plan and aligned with the Paris Agreement. So I would like to start bringing this information. Excellent. Thank you very much. Tiago, would you like to continue? Well, before anything else, it's a pleasure to be here because these discussions are always important and welcome. Because we need understanding the carbon market is no easy task. It's highly technical, highly complex, so these discussion panels come always in a good time. So all the companies in the financial sector are getting ready for some time now. We see many financial institutions with very strong teams that involve like forest engineers, multidisciplinary teams that are studying and talking and creating specific teams in the institutions and with specific investment funds for this market. So again, this preparation has started. It's not starting right now. It started some time ago. And that's the main challenge, to understand that market, how it works, how we can generate new assets, how we can integrate things. And when we talk about integrity, we're talking about integrity on different segments: social, technological, market, finance. So I believe that this internal training is the main challenge and the main need in the financial sector. And I think that also generates this opportunity for the financial market to generate new products, because we demand a lot of financial products. You need financial resources to develop some projects. And when we talk about climate change, it's not only about the environment. The environment, okay, it's the final objective. But in order to get there, you must have a social knowledge, you must have like geopolitical knowledge, economical knowledge. So I truly believe that this preparation and this understanding is key and will make the financial sector efficient to generate new products that will be consistent to make this market work. Thank you, Thiago. Nice that we heard about information and how complex and the multidisciplinarity of this matter. We continue with Aline. Okay, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to build on what they mentioned. There are some things that we realize. It's the clear need for financing. So thinking of opportunities, I believe we have plenty of opportunities related to financing, but not only the traditional funding and financing, because, okay, we have that in mind, but there is plenty of important opportunities in mediation. Financial institutions will be able to join the dots and to make ends meet, and we have many companies, many players that want to issue these certifications. So it's a role of the financial institutions to generate opportunities for new businesses, for new ways to connect audiences that didn't necessarily went through that market, because the market is already here. So how can we add to this industry that it's already settled? We see the regulated market, but we need more regulations in the financial system. Besides intermediation, there are many projects that can be developed and depend on financing. They need consultancy, they need the structuring, and of course, there is a whole area in our institutions that, of course, Vini will talk about that as well. But there is a huge opportunity to develop interesting products that involve players in niches that we're not used to, and we are going to have new measurements. These risks also bring opportunities. Because speaking of as financial institutions, we can see our portfolio, check our carbon footprint, and check how much it demands in this new environment. And what opportunities for growth do we have, not only for us, but how can we access cost of emissions and to start thinking about pricing strategies. What is worth investing, what is not worth, so what's the cost of that financing so that the project is valuable to move on. So there are many aspects that need to be considered. And now we have a whole environment for regulations. This is one of the rare opportunities that we have, a new market in the making. So again, what can we do to make this market simple, to be more efficient from the legal perspective, and also work on the legal certainty, because it's quite incipient if you want to have new questionings that will make many projects fragile and many agents will feel insecure. So these are important aspects for the financing sector. Thank you. It's really important to talk about the threats and opportunities in the financial market and also to bring strength to this legal set. And Viviane, to close. So in a nutshell, to bring the role of the financial system, I think it's a great opportunity for Brazil to take place as a local solution and global at the same time. Carbon market, voluntary and regulated, is here to bring the capital flow so that we can have more investment for decarbonization and for a low carbon economy. So that's the opportunity. So besides data, we need robust technologies that are in the system so that financial institutions can compare and contrast and develop financial products. And according to what Thiago mentioned, we've been working on that with taxonomy. So through FEBRABAN, if the bank hasn't adopted yours, we provide support in taxonomy.
As empresas também vão saber quais são os critérios.
Because then companies can learn about the KPIs and the criteria that are going to be used in the sectors. And most importantly, the regulations of this emission market, they have a deadline, they have 5 years to be implemented, but the industry and all sectors must do their homework and to learn what their carbon footprint is. And think, can I monetize that credit or am I going to create that? How much is that going to cost? And in a regulated market, we can create opportunities thinking that if we have offer, demand, price, net, liquidity, and in a robust market, and if we can operate with the international market, and that's where I see the great advantage that we have a demand, and Brazil is a great provider of carbon credit to the world. So that's why I see capital flow coming here, because we have renewable energy, we are more efficient, and we can contribute with decarbonization. So this is both for demand and offer. And looking at international market, internationally, and also within voluntary, we have to develop project with integrity and quality, because this is what the off-takers will be looking for, and this is what will define price. So these are the opportunities that Brazil has a very high competitive leverage. So that's why financial institutions are keeping an eye on us. And now it's the moment to participate in this regulation. If we know where to find the opportunities, we can contribute to indicate. So it's important to do our homework. Excellent, excellent. And we have to tie the knots and to bring everything together. So we have to potentialize this. So let's move now to a second round of questions. And then we have one for you, Tiago.
Nós vamos falar agora especificamente
We are going to talk about the recent approval of the legal framework for carbon credit
como as instituições financeiras
and looking how financial institutions should get ready to integrate these credit to price carbon and risk analysis and investment decisions for investment. So, Daniela, in this legal set, can you please tell us how the BNDES thinks about the financial sector in structuring a market that is reliable and that can bring real benefits for that? Thank you, Clarissa.
Também o gancho, né, deixa aqui de todo
I think also to piggyback on what she said, and everything that we've been thinking about system and taxonomy and methodology,
agora da própria
we have new assets with the regulations from the central bank that will demand
de estándares e de
a standard and contabilization and scenarios from the companies. There is a whole new metric
desafio
regarding investment and risk that's quite challenging. Well, we have this perspective.
o BNDES como
We have BNDES as a state-owned bank for development
além das oportunidades que já
that has been trying to bring not only the opportunities, but to try to foster
mercado, especialmente
this whole market with huge potential that Brazil has regarding carbon credit in the forest,
as conotações aí de créditos
that these are the connotations of highly integrated credit, especially for recovery of forests. So we have removal of carbon when you restore biomas, and there is the national vegetation plan with a public policy to revert that,
também plano de mitigação.
and also the mitigation plan.
Tem toda essa visão de como fomentar
So there is this whole mindset to preserve the market.
elaborar
And on that sense, we need to write, to think from scratch.
esses projetos, né, de
So these projects
muita necessidade
typically have a great need of non-refundable resources.
não se bancarizam, né?
They don't pay themselves, as we say.
Possibilidade de crédito,
There is no possibility for credit or warrants.
ação na parte não
So the government has a role in the non-refundable to foster that. It's to foster projects with volunteer work and systematization and the whole regulation in compliance in the regulated market and
nível e
can be interoperable. So we think that we call non-refundable to restore, we call the Amazon Restoration Arc.
do Fundo Amazônia para a
So everything for the Amazon Fund for projects,
restauração ecológica, mas também viés de
but also this idea to foster a whole market of credit, so refundable, that can be achievable. So with the fund, from the climate fund that we have for climate change, this is an instrument that we've been using in the sub-program so that we can have proper resources that can be funded and that they have an ROI. So we have some projects, some banks are providing warrants. So it's like you are creating a new sector that is not even an economical activity code for that. So it's a whole work to build and to have development in these projects and projects that have integrity itself with new players, with new agents, and that can be put in banks. So it's a whole part of
também
fomenting new projects
desenhos de garantia,
and even new designs for warranty.
não sabe qual
Oftentimes you don't know what instrument that you can get. So carbon credit, it's no easy task.
garantia a gente está falando. Então,
So what guarantees are we talking about? So there is a whole construction of there is the pro forest along with Petrobras so that we can try and understand to have a standardization of these instruments of this purchase so that we can be an instrument for financing. Having like more standardized contracts can be an instrument for warranty for the banks. So it's to develop all these methodologies and all these works.
So we have been structuring forest concessional projects. Inside the forest concessions, there is this bias on conservation and also on encouraging forest conservation. And so for participating parties in these competitions, to some extent, they also have to develop restoration activities, and this is a potential for forest restoration markets. Next year, thinking about all these difficulties,
potenciais gargalos,
potential bottlenecks and certifications and methodologies, the bank also launched this public call so as to listen to everyone, the academia, NGOs, companies, during a whole month. We listened to different questions about these guiding principles. What's missing about this voluntary market? What's missing about Brazil? Methodologies, certification, providers, national or international ones. So we consulted with all the parties. We're consolidating all the data
justamente para tentar entender os
just to understand this scenario and the different views on this topic so that we can see the next steps that we will take as a development bank and therefore help the country to advance in these bottlenecks. So basically, that's what we are seeing with our work
estruturação
as
potencial.
we structure all the potentials that we have seen.
Obrigada por compartilhar pouco isso.
Wonderful, thanks for sharing about the role on development and construction of this market as a public bank. Now, private banks will have the word now. Viviane, considering your work in sustainable financial methods, how does Santander integrate the sustainability criteria and innovation criteria
para apoiar o
in,
mercado.
in its products in order to support this in Brazil? Okay.
Deixa eu aqui no Dadê.
I will mention a practical case. Then you mentioned about the potential that this sector has in preserving forests. Up to by 2040, this sector will generate 35 billion in incomes if we consider that there are more than 2 million hectares in degraded lands to be restored. So how do we work?
Setor que ainda precisa ser desenvolvido.
We still needed to develop this sector. There are many startups working on that, and they are gathering together the best minds in the field, those that most planted the planted the
Escala. Então,
greatest number of seeds here in Brazil, and how we can do this at large scale. When there is a new startup project, we lack guarantees because there are no guarantees. There are many models that acquire lands. So we need this upfront investment,
bem alto para você
this initial capital so as to invest and acquire lands and buy also degraded lands and restore them. So we needed to work through across this chain. We do not have this transformation or this
fornecedores das mudas.
production chain as well, about the seed collectors, those that are going to move them about. So many of them are located here in the Middle East, here in Brazil, and also the southeast regions in Brazil. And they are actually moving to the Amazon in order to help their people from São Paulo, from Minas. They are moving their seedlings to the states of Pará, for example. So how can we work with them? How can we can include these regions?
Sobre análise do
So when it comes to banking analysis, we created a specific and dedicated team
finance,
combining project finance and corporate financing to look at forest restoration. We work on this risk-specific framework for projects and their steps because they are at different stages, and we have to be based on SBTI and science because we still lack a PNG and data, so that we can systematize all the data. So we also follow on the activities developed by these companies, so that we can also encourage them to move further.
a gente apoia esse
And also when it comes to these support to these off tankers and investors in SP, so as we can structure these restoration projects, so that we can make them feasible and have the right incomes for this.
eles conseguem fechar o contrato de compra
Once we can
futuros, tá? Porque se a
we
gente
can anticipate the purchase of these future credits, because if we are willing to fund nature, We also need to set our own credit and risk rules, and we do not have them yet because we don't have this cash flow. So we have to run this whole analysis according to the planting of this tree. Once it develops and is mature, and there is a whole forest standing, we need to take this period into account, especially until we have this native forest back. And we need to monitor these calculations and also monitor this project.
Dar garantia para o comprador futuro.
So we need to provide these guarantees for these future credits, for these future buyers, so that the companies can have these incomes anticipated. The Brazilian Development Bank also has a best line available for restoration projects, especially for these 25-year-long projects with a 1% rate interest rate here in Brazil. Well, this is a very low rate, so we cannot even compete with that. So the Brazilian Development Bank is encouraging this. Now, so public and private banks are working towards this goal because we also require guarantees and 100% of the value that will be financed. So the risk analysis is up to us when it comes to startups and guarantees. We need to support them. So we work to develop this field. We also could also enable this process for a startup, which was a public case here in Brazil. And this startup will receive 100 million reais so that they can implement in this restoration. This will not be used for land acquisition, okay? And also we are also investing in restoration companies for in biomas. One of the companies that we have, for example, as partners, there are Rabobank, Vale, Marfrig, Itaú, and Suzano, because the idea is to position Brazil in this sector at a global level. Because if we can do that with this pulp and paper sector, how can we, with all this technology and the whole chain structure, why can't we not do this for our native forests? So we need to combine efforts and work together with Embrapa to see what the best species, how we can have this genetic improvement of these species, how we can also work together with the communities, and there is a lot of things that we can do. So we are combining private and public capitals and taking risks. Because as you can see, this is a market that it needs to be developed, and everybody needs to be working in a transparent manner, sharing data and seeing where the risks are. And that's how we will develop these opportunities, and that's how we will create them. We also change the logic because this is no longer a bilateral relationship. I will not look for the planet financing, the off-taker, the capital, this catalytic capital, so as to make it possible, because they have they are for the these long-term operations. And they want, for example, these forests to stand for 100 years. That's why we changed our business model. How can we keep these leasing contracts and ensure our future credit buyers that you keep these forests for at least 100 years in a partnership? That's why our business model became more costly, and that's why that we are acquiring these lands. That's why the work that our bank does with forest concessions will mitigate the risks regarding lands, and we have public lands, a conservation area, for example, and we will have the systemic impact on these lands. So there are many opportunities in this regard. We needed to get to know the business, the client, so that we can get all the details to enable these projects. Very nice. What are practical examples to illustrate all these challenges that still exist in this new context, so that we can also mention how complementary these different agents can be among themselves. And is under the umbrella of this question, please could you tell us how Citibank is also assessing risks and opportunities related to carbon emissions, and how this can impact the credit-related decisions and investments over the next years? Thank you so much. Well, the great opportunity here, and this will be a turning point for us once with the Carbon Act is passed, is the existence of the dysregulated market with this negotiable demand, because there will be a necessary demand for this type of credit.
São poucos os setores em que a gente
So there are only few sectors when we start already knowing the type of demand we will receive. Of course, we know that this will depend on different types of negotiations. We can also establish the regulation because we also want to have this information upfront. And there is also an opportunity because we needed to take up this commitment, for example, when it comes to the environment, climate changes, and all topics related to these two pillars. Because once we implement all these methodologies and all this analysis, so we need to adopt them consistently in a dynamic manner, always evolving. So we needed to adhere to these concepts. Obviously, we needed to take the risks and list all of them. And when it comes to risks, generally speaking, we see that part of them, well, the majority of them has already been observed as we also formed the very authority of SPCE, and when we discuss the implementation of these regulations. And some of them have already been mentioned here. One of our concerns is credibility. These double account, those who have been here for longer. We also have serious issues regarding these land titling. And in Brazil, there are a few things that are specific to our country, and there are also some risks that are related to this specific market. And we need to analyze them carefully because we need to ponder over them because the risks attract costs. How can we mitigate them? And this must be viable. So how can we do that so that the market this surging market with not much not many net gains can be viable. And talking about this liquidity, for the market to go, we also need to provide exits, for example. And we need to keep, for example, our forest standing for 100 years. How can I make it viable if this is a long-term project? We needed to have this liquidity and this circularity. So this interoperability in two different perspectives is important. For example, the regulated party and the voluntary party. And we see that not all jurisdictions show this problem. And we needed to have this methodology, this criteria, so that we can do that. But interoperability at a desired level so that we can have the right liquidity for this. And another point mentioned is the interoperability with the foreign countries. So for this to work, credibility is also related to this point because when this methodology is verifiable, and that is also combined with other jurisdictions, and I can understand that how coherent this is and its origin. It doesn't have to be necessarily similar to others, but it must be coherent. So I can also be using this credit so that we can talk to our international investors. And this is important so that we can generate this liquidity for this market because then we are going to reach this pool of investors that is totally different from the one that we already have here in our country. And of course, we know that the federal government here in Brazil is very much concerned about this regulation. We know that there are great concerns about what can be imported, what cannot be imported, the high-end proofs, and also how we are going to go about this. But although there are these risks and these discussions are still relevant, these are unique opportunities, and I agree with what Viviane said, right? And we have no doubts about this. But in order to really have this opportunity of investment so that we can make the most of this opportunity, we need to be concerned about serving our audience. People need to understand what we do. They need to believe in what we do. This must be a solid and credible activity in the country. In order to do that, we can mitigate historical elements in our country. Why not also take advantage of this emerging market so that we can also bring in more solidity to this market?
Fundamental mesmo esse da credibilidade.
This credibility is very important, and how this will unfold as well is very important.
Tiago, a sistêmica ela acompanha.
And also we also see, for example, these legal risks and operational risks when it comes to the carbon market. So what are the main legal risks existing in this market that should be avoided so as to avoid these distortions and also the repetition of of these unsuccessful cases, and how can we play a role when it comes to having this more robust governance?
Pergunta fundamental, né?
That's a great question because the carbon market is connected to credibility. It's that simple.
Aquela integridade naqueles diferentes.
If you don't have those different aspects that I mentioned before, social, financial, and environmental,
E o que a gente
things don't move. And what we've seen in the carbon market was a crisis in credibility.
no semestre de 2022
The second term of 2022, we saw many issues in the media
de processo
uh,
de certificação que
questioning the credibility for this
dentro do
finance, if they were like within the standards of integrity or not.
agora a beleza do mercado voluntário
But the beauty of the volunteer market is this capacity to self-regulate
correção desse
and to find a correction of those points and to renew itself. I believe that the experience of the voluntary market that we've been working with that for 20 years, if we consider the Kyoto Protocol
padrão VCE
and the VCS standard that's in the market, we've had like almost 20 years of experience. And we can see how these standards have matured. They bring a self-regulation. And I think we are on such a level that we have plenty of experience and consolidation of what's good and what's not.
mercado regular
I believe that the regulated market will have to consider, because when we think about SBC that will allow part of the volunteer assets can be used in a regulated market, okay, so what standard of certification am I going to accept that? There is a whole, can I accept the whole standard? So there are criteria, so Integrities Council, other markets, carbon card prints, that they establish methodologies and standards that are reliable.
então eu acho que essa é uma questão que
So I believe that this is an important issue so that can bring the experience from the voluntary work so that it is created within these regulations and in such a way that it's efficient.
no
But well, are there many risks when you develop and you operate carbon? There are many legal risks. When you think about nature-based solutions, you have the funding aspect. It's not like you have that and that chain and everything is fine. It's not like that, unfortunately.
verificar o CAR, tem
We have to check carton, georeference, if it's certified, if there is any kind of overlapping of positioning, and you must get that dominial registry. You have to go to the registry offices to check if they are registered. So there is a complex criteria, and it depends financial resources.
esse é risco, né?
So that's a high risk. And for each of these risks, we have a protocol. And for each of these protocols, we need money.
Você tem os riscos jurídicos,
So we have legal risks. You have operational risks as well. Because oftentimes, to implement a methodology in the field, it's not that easy.
sistêmica é a empresa
The Systemica is the company that won the first allowance to have the certification. We have 10,000 hectares to restore.
a metodologia
We are debugging technology and methodology today. And for carbon methodology, that's one. That is a methodology for social certification. And there is another one that gathers the best integrity between carbon. That's a third methodology. So you see, we are learning from all these methodologies to learn how can we go on field to do processes of natural restoration or ecological. Is it like tilled planting? Am I going to use some systems of planting rather than others? So this needs to be very well thought. And as you mentioned, we don't have that much experience like companies that are experts on that and with practical good results on reforestation of native forests. We have some others that they have 2 million hectares of planted forest. It's a huge success. But how can we bring that to native forests? That's another layer of difficulty. So again, these are risks Then when we talk about nature-based solutions, we think about forest restoration, reforestation, and there are different methodologies for that. And there are many legal, operational, contract risks. If I celebrate a contract with a private company, we go along a line. But when I do the same contract with a traditional community or indigenous contract, it's a different language. It's a different contract. There is a whole process with the government, with the indigenous institutions from the government, and we have to look and certify if that is according to legislation or not. So again, there are many risks, but experience of voluntary work shows that it is possible. The buyers know what's good and what's not. And in order to sell credit carbon today, we do a due diligence, not only the certification that have to be audited on a constant basis. I have the due diligence with the buyers, and maybe their due diligence may last 6, 7, 8 months, depending on how complex the project is. And oftentimes they are even more dense than the carbon credit, because nobody wants to run the risk of losing reputation because of carbon restoration. So everybody knows about the risks, but we have very well established criteria and experience so that we can learn and we can know which way we have to go. Excellent. Can I just build on that? Not to mention the risks of fires, okay? Because if we're talking about forests, forests can burn. But I believe that native forest is way more resilient. So there are many methods for mitigation. But this is a component that when we think about a project, the due diligences are the M&A.
Então, a gente está olhando ali o acessório, que é o...
So we think about the accessory, that's carbon, but we look at the whole chain. So partners, it's a due diligence of M&A.
Obrigada, Thiago, e pela complementação.
Thiago, thank you for your extra comment.
Bastante ampla, até a complexidade.
It's very interesting, even the complexity of the context that you brought in the first answer.
Vamos agora...
Okay, so let's move now for one general question.
Agora eu gostaria que vocês falassem pouquinho
I would like you to tell us about the challenges and opportunities in the integration of these markets, regulated and voluntary markets,
principalmente aqui por uma ótica de...
especially if we consider the regional specificities and also regarding the sectors. So what strategies are we thinking about to ensure the quality and integrity of credits in those cases? Now we're going to start with Aline.
Queria ter todas essas respostas.
Oh, I wish I had all these answers.
Acho que a gente tem aqui algumas dicas.
We have some tips. I think the market is way more mature. We've been working with that for 20 years now.
Tem as diligências de projeto.
We have the diligence for projects, as you mentioned. So how can we ensure integrity? And we have the parts of due diligence for projects. We also have those for
próprias do país que a gente acabou
the country difficulties, and we can think about the registrars.
Mas eu acho também que a
But I also think that we can move forward on those regards when we have like a broader view of the methodologies. He mentioned that as well.
eu acho que é muito
And I think that credibility is crucial because it's intimately connected to what methodology or methodologies are used. Tiago also mentioned that when he talked about carbon in the market.
certificar o que vem do mercado.
So how can I certify whatever comes from the voluntary work market? Not only it will be integrated and can be checked, I also think that you really have to talk to whatever is possible to verified in the real market.
Respostas fáceis.
So, and these are no easy questions and with no easy answers. So what can we do with methodologies that are internationally accepted and they can adapt to our reality of going to the countryside of Amazon, Pará, and do all these verifications?
Tem uma série de outras
And there is a series of other impacts, and it's a matter of,
social, tem outros
there is a social matter and other aspects that we really have to make things connect. Having said that, I think the challenge we have that people are going to show is that, well, okay, we must solve that. We have plenty of authority to do that, to participate. We have the concepts, and that will evolve somehow. Another point that we have to consider is how can we, in a country under development, that nationally we understand all those peculiarities, certain specific needs for some markets. We have some peculiarities in Brazil, and that this is ours. But I think that these national forums, and I'm going to mention COP because that's the buzzword, but there are ways that we have opportunities to show the need of considering all the local specificities. And there is a whole part regarding diplomatic discussions that it's not about the financial institutions of specific players, but we also have something to be taken care of, given that we need somehow we need to evaluate how we are going to defend that. And you mentioned Cibanco from the beginning. So we know that some things that are legal, that is the legal framework, and we need to assess how that is going to fit in this global jigsaw puzzle. Another interesting perspective regarding credit that I mentioned is legal certainty, and that goes through about this having all the discussions and all the decisions that come to challenge projects, but also a clear definition of responsibilities. We have an old habit in Brazil to put everybody in the same pot, and he's laughing, and to understand that that brings more security because everybody is accountable, and we are checking everything, and everybody's checking everything that's going to work. Okay, and there is always somebody to ask for information. That adds an absurd cost to the operation. And when you have a clear chain of responsibilities and being responsible for the project, so you have those that issue credit, the investors, that depending on the profile of investors, we're talking about like 6-8 months of due diligence. So how hyper-sufficient that is so that I can provide the same protection if I'm selling that credit in the retail market. So we must have all these bits and pieces because we can make that more feasible. Because if we generate insecurity for whoever participates, and there is a high cost that is related to this market, and it generates these discrepancies. So these are the aspects that I would like to bring, but with the legal certainty, we know that it's going to be very difficult to understand because it's not centralized. And I think this is important that we have to think together. Well, thank you. And let's go to Daniela. Well, I don't think we need because you've said it all. But just to brush that, and I can see the clock ticking for us. We only have 10 minutes.
Tudo isso que foi falado, né? Só pensando pouquinho no.
It's just to think on a regional level. Just to give an example. Forest, temperate forest methodologies are different from tropical forests. So our biomas are all tropical that are different from the Caatinga, that it's a very degraded bioma that needs close attention. And sectors are different as well. So to think about a biomass or renewable energy that is highly consolidated, so we have to try to understand the needs of that specific bioma regarding restoration, removal, and dynamics for growth. So again, just to give you an example, in agribusiness, that it's not in the regulated market, but you think about having like a contabilization of good practices?
We needed to develop, for example, carbon stock good practices in carbon stock and also in corn crops and wheat crops. So what type of soil carbon methodologies? And there is Embrapa and other institutions that can generate this type of regional specificities. What the country really needs, this look. But a key word, and going back to certification, right? Methodologies. We need to have the scientific credibility. This is very important.
Todos esses desenvolvimentos
All these developments require this
credibilidade
robust pillars so as to be well fundamented. And now, thinking about the responsibilities, we need to look at this so that we can develop these methodologies in terms of governance and avoiding conflicts of interest. There are so many players in this sector. So they need to have their own roles and responsibilities so that we can also avoid these conflicts. So these are aspects that can really create this potential according to the Brazilian law so that we can have the trading of these interoperability in the voluntary market. We will, of course, derive the benefits from these results of how this voluntary market can be seen under the light of interoperability and emission market. This can help to the development of this integrated system, this robust system, with all these requirements so that we can address these challenges. Thank you so much. Now, Tiago, let's listen to your opinion, and then Viviane after him. I'll be very pragmatic in answering this because there are a few things. For example, the methodologies. What are the methodologies that must be accepted? This interoperability between the voluntary market and the regulated market. The second point has to do with the accounting for these different credit transactions in the regulated market and also for the international accounting, because in the Brazilian law there must be rendered an account for other countries, and Brazil will adjust accordingly each one of these methodologies. For example, the RED methodology for forest conservation, for example, this is widely used here in Brazil. Should we adjust this according to the buying country, for example? Should this be accounted by them, not by us? Maybe not, because this is a widely used methodology. It is very costly for Brazil to give them these assets. On the other hand, these RED methodologies, which are expensive to be developed here in Brazil, once we adjust them accordingly, I am elevating the price of this asset and attracting more capital to Brazil. This accounting is extremely important, and Brazil needs to be very intelligent so as not to impact the bad development of these projects. On the other hand, we have to encourage its development so that we can keep our credibility at an international level that can meet these nationally determined commitments. And when it comes to these two markets, there are three layers. The private layer, which means the voluntary development in private environments, for example, private properties, and also they have the jurisdictional pillars. The states are developing their own asset generation models at a state level, and we also have the accounting inside the regulated market. So this is another aspect. So the regulation of these aspects must also help this to work harmoniously. So these are the 3 points that we needed to pay attention to as we have the SPC regulation working here in Brazil. Now it all comes down to data, and they all need to be available in a transparent manner, because then we reduce all these observance costs. We won't need three off-takers doing the same due diligence and checking everything. Sometimes they will provide the same documentation to different players besides the bank, the Brazilian Development Bank, and these are endless lists. The data and transparency will be very helpful, and this will be also helping us when it comes to methodologies and also in scaling this market. Thank you so much, wonderful, and thanks for accelerating now towards the end. Maybe we have this quick question. Maybe this is not a very short question, but we want short answers, okay? So to conclude, please, could you tell us how companies that are being represented by you are working when it comes to climate literacy in their own ecosystems, and also education for the development of projects in carbon markets? Is Tiago, Daniela, Viviane, and then Aline will conclude the round.
Muito bom. Eu acho que essa
Wonderful. So
de letramento e
this literacy and education on the topic is fundamental because this is a complex topic.
de novo, ele não é um tema
Again, this is not an environmental issue merely. This it is, has a social aspect. The geopolitical elements are involved. We are dealing with an international topic. So this is a complex situation. We need to generate content on that. When it comes to the systemic view, we generated these quarterly reports together with BTG Pactual Bank. So we see what is going on in the market using different methodologies. We see how the market behaves accordingly, the credits issued, and the price they are being sold at. So this is one of our mechanisms. Another mechanism is that all the projects developed by us, we put in our contracts that we are obliged to educate these populations that are being affected by our projects.
capacitação
So we provided this education under different aspects. For example, what's climate change and what about the carbon
Então, eu acho
market?
é um mínimo
So this
necessário para que a
is
gente
the minimal education so that we can do what we do. And obviously, we also need to publish different articles about these relevant aspects about how the market works, what it is like, and so on and so forth.
Pegando um gancho aqui para aproveitar que é engraçado.
And based on that, I would like to say that when the big clock now is no longer showing the seconds here, right?
Mas vamos lá.
Now let's check.
A gente acabou de revisar
We have just revised
regulação
the regulation for all financial institutions so that we can have an environmental, social, and climate responsibilities, which is demanded uh, by the international authority in this field. We have just revised the PRSAC. This is our policy together with our next action plan for the next 3 years. This has just been approved, and we had a different access when it comes to the work, support structures. And there is one of the axes called people and competencies. So we are also internalizing this big plan, this whole capacity building for our employees
sobre esses temas.
about this topic. So we are developing this at a strategic level. We have this action plan approved by our committee, and during the next 3 years we will work with risks, climate-related topics, and all the planning for educational projects and the whole ecosystem of everything that we are doing, concessions, studies on restoration and the difficulties that we find together with the IDB. So the whole development of a restoration plans. So there are many partners at the Ministry of the Environment, the federal government. They are all involved, and it is not actually the literacy in itself, but we are actually developing this so that we can articulate all the members of this sector. Thank you so much.
Bom, além do que eles falaram,
Well, apart from this, there is a practical tip. The best literacy, it has to do with integrating this to the business. And second, setting this as a criteria for variable remuneration. So then it comes from top to bottom, and then with all this integration, things will work wonderfully. Okay, there is a target to be achieved, but if you can develop this product and look at a sustainable business, that will be, for example, your bonus will be multiplied by 10, let's say, and people will start to look for this great opportunity that we start to have a glimpse of what they can do. So this is very good. So we needed to touch people's pocket in this regard, and we have to work with the whole ecosystem to make it work. And very well, the clock has died, right? But I'll be very brief. But our institution is present in over 90 countries, so we have different stages in different countries. So internally, there is this possibility of talking to people. They are in different jurisdictions whose profiles and stages are totally different from ours, and we can learn from them So as we are developing this emerging market in Brazil, we can also talk about these elements because we have been doing this for the last 20 years, and we can add to this development. We talked about this taxonomy and what do we know that is really working well, what's not, how can we contribute to the development of this market. So being present in many countries is something helpful to us. And also train the whole executive committee, as I was talking to you. FGV also supported us in this sense, and we had some sessions with our executive committee, with sales teams, product teams, because we can also demand them to be focused and dedicated. We need to help them to understand the opportunities that lie therein, and also these multidisciplinary aspects. So not everyone is ready for that. They might be willing to be ready, but they need to be ready to make it effective. So I've been training them effectively inside our group of employees so that we can then later demand something from them. And we also know that they will have the right framework so that they can develop themselves in this new market. They will still need to hold the new sessions because this is a dynamic project, right? Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to contribute to our own literacy in this topic, carbon markets. On behalf of FEBRABAN, I would like to thank you for your contributions, and also your this audience and those who are joining us online. Thank you so much.